Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the Culturally Competent Conversations for Equity and Belongingness Summit. I am so thrilled to bring this next presenter to talk about what he's going to talk about with you, but because this is such an important topic. But before I do that, just a couple of housekeeping notes. Make sure you comment using our Facebook page or our YouTube channel, both at c3eb.com, which is where you would be watching this anyway. And whether you're watching this live with us right now or you're watching this later, make sure you comment if you have questions. Or you want to give feedback to our speaker, because we will be monitoring our comments even after the live is done. So we will be able to get the feedback and the questions back to our speaker and get them answered for you. Secondly, before I get into the introduction, the summit and our future programming would not be possible if not for our partners and sponsors who believed in this dream and who are walking the walk with us toward equity, toward belongingness, and toward intentional inclusion. So a huge thank you to Essential IT, my web team, who has literally been my backbone, foundation, everything through this entire project, to the Defy the Status Quo Marketing, our content specialists, and to our generous partners and sponsors, Zanzibar Enterprises, who is our platinum sponsor, and to the Nielsen Company, who's our pearl partner. With that being said, it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you to Dan Moen, or Dijuri. Dan also goes by his, who's the founder and CEO of Dijuri Media. Dan also goes by his stage name, Dijuri, and he's a graphic designer, a photographer, a musician, a community organizer, an activist, and a stage performer who resides in the Metro Detroit area. Born in the Philippines and adopted to the United States, Dan grew up with a transracial and transnational identity. In 2017, Dan was reunited with his biological family through social media and traveled back to regain a sense of belonging with his newly reunited family. His experiences led him to pursue a passion for studying cultures, philosophy, sociology, and anthropology. Dan has become deeply involved in multiple nonprofits and various multicultural communities. He is the Marketing and Communications Chair for the Council of Asian Pacific Americans, or CAPA, a member of the Filipino National Historical Society, and a volunteer graphic designer and instructor for the Philippine American Community Center in Southfield. With his passion for studying humanity as well as art and design, Dan went to Oakland University and graduated with a bachelor's in integrative studies, focusing on advertising, marketing, sociology, and communications. Dan has produced 2 musical albums, which are available on Spotify, Amazon, iTunes, and other musical platforms. To learn more about Dan, visit his website, dijurimedia.com, and we will put that up on a banner for you. But without further ado, Dan, my friend, welcome to the C3EB Summit platform, and thank you so much for contributing your experience and your expertise on this incredibly important topic.
Thank you so much, AJ. I really wanted to say wholeheartedly and from the bottom of my heart, this means a huge deal to be able to have this platform to speak and to share my story, and then hopefully uplift other adoptees and their stories as well. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into my PowerPoint. So currently right now, I'm actually in the process of working on a book that I am planning on publishing next year in late November, because November is National Adoption Awareness Month. I will explain that in a little bit. But I am interviewing adoptees all over the world with different stories to kind of shed light on our experiences. And I am primarily focusing on adoptees of color. So with that being said, so right here, as you can see, you see the hashtag flip the script. That hashtag has been circulating the internet and social media for a while among the adoptee community, because for a very long time, many adoptees have felt they don't really have a voice when we talk about the subject of adoptions, because a lot of times most of the stories people hear come from the adoptive parents, which isn't bad. It's just the adoptee experience usually doesn't have as much light as it really should have. As AJ mentioned, this is my logo and my website. Dijuri Media. You can check out my website and social media on there to learn more about me. So with that being said, so November is National Adoption Awareness Month. I believe it does include foster care. I could be wrong on that one, but many people don't know that November is National Adoption Awareness Month. And that is the time where a lot of adoptees have been speaking up and trying to share their stories. And especially when it comes to intersectionality and when it comes to race relations, adoptees are kind of in a unique position when it comes to those topics. And before I dive more deeper into my presentation, I am speaking completely on my experience, and I do not speak for all adoptees. So whatever I say is from my personal experiences. So on average, there is about 40,000 children worldwide annually that immigrate from more than 100 countries through adoption, and a trend that has been increasing rapidly in the United States since the 1970s, according to an article from Time magazine. And as I mentioned before, oftentimes adoptees, we don't really hear too much of their stories, so you see the hashtag flip the script. Adoption processes lack resources and programs that prepare adoptive families for depression, suicide, and racism involving their child. Now, this presentation I'm about to show to you is a presentation that I did for Oakland University for my communications project. I'm not going to focus so much on all the other aspects of it, such as the depression and the suicide, but I will highlight that as that is very important, and also the deportations that have happened. And many people don't know about that, and I wanted to bring that to the forefront as well. But I am going to focus a lot on my personal experience with my adoption experience. So as I mentioned, every adoptee has a different story, and I consider myself as a story that is still being written. And with that passion, that's where I had the drive to finally publish a book. Ideally, like I mentioned, by next November. So I'm going to be interviewing many different adoptees of color and sharing our stories within this book. Each chapter is designed to be a day. So it's 30 adoptees for 30 days. It might be more depending on how many I get. But the goal is it's a 30 days, 30 adoptees. You read one chapter per day on that. So hashtag flip the script. So now about my backstory. So I was adopted at about 8 months old. I was born in 1988. I came here in late 1988, and I officially became part of the family in 1989. Growing up, my family, we celebrated our adoptions. My sister and I are both adopted. We are not biologically related. And we would have what was called Filipino Day. So my parents were incredibly supportive with our adoptions. I know many other adoptees have different stories, but as I mentioned, I'm just speaking on my behalf. Because unfortunately, a lot of adoptions, what tends to happen is the parents adopt a child and a lot of them feel love and care and nurture is all you need. But there are certain things that comes with adopting a child that parents must be aware of, especially if the child is transracial or transnational. Now, with that being said, what is transracial and transnational? Transracial means that the child is biologically of one ethnicity and the parents are of another. Transnational means the child was born in another country and then was adopted into the United States. That's basically what that means. So growing up, when I was adopted, my family was really never given any resources, which hindered the acceptance into my early adolescent years. So I really struggled with adoption internally. I didn't have the words to describe it. I didn't know how to describe it. And this was long before there was a focus on things such as microaggressions and bullying and things like that. I didn't know how to express it until more in recent years. And it wasn't until around, I would say, middle school, definitely into high school, when I really full came to terms with it. And it became a huge part of my identity. And although I do love my community that I grew up in, I did feel very mentally isolated internally. And in the small town, the town that I come from is not heavily diverse. In fact, the only other people of color I really grew up around primarily were other adoptees. So there wasn't a lot of perspectives I could share in a multicultural setting. So let's see. So as AJ mentioned, in 2017, I took the leap on social media. So backstory, 2 years prior to that, I decided to go online and go ahead and message a bunch of people who shared my biological last name, my birth last name. How did I know that? Well, what happened was when my family adopted me, we were given this album that had everything written down about the backstory about my biological mother. We also had the legal documents to back that up as well. So we followed the bits and pieces of that story, such as the location where I was born to where the birth mother's family is from, and kind of pieced together little bits. So in 2015, I sent out this mass message on Facebook. I took an absolute nosedive and just was like, hi, my name is Dan. Here's my backstory. I'm not looking for money. I'm not looking for anything. I just want to learn about who I am. Because a friend of mine suggested to try Facebook because a lot of people are on there and other social media. So I presented this speech and sent it out to a bunch of people. Nothing came back for 2 years. In 2017, in January, I got a message from my now cousin who was living in Saudi Arabia at the time and said, I will forward you to my aunt who lives in Texas. Long story short, through a lot of communicating, because Filipinos love social media, we shared my story among these people we've never met before. So it was a little scary, I'm not going to lie, because these are people who never met me. I never met them. There was a lot of skepticism on the sides where we weren't entirely sure if this was true or not. And what ended up happening is to confirm that we were related, because we tracked back some of the names, because in this document we were given, they gave the names of my grandparents. And my aunt in Texas was like, oh yeah, we know who that is. So we did Ancestry. We did the DNA test, and on Ancestry.com, for those who don't know, you send in your saliva and then they populate the DNA, and it is very secure. And what happens is they will match you with people who share your DNA. And luckily, my aunt showed up. So I will be calling her Tita because that's what we like to call our aunts and uncles in the Filipino community, is Tita and Tito. So my Tita showed up on there as a match. So we're like, okay, we found the family. And then what happened is from there, we're like, okay, we found the family and now we're trying to find the biological mother. And it's a long story. I actually documented the whole story on my YouTube channel. There's chapters by chapters that talk all about my experience, and even down to the day that I met my birth mother. So we went through months of trial and error, trying to match these names, trying to match the backstories. And finally, one night, my tita messaged me and says, we found her. And that was an absolutely no words to describe moment. We did a live video chat back and forth through Facebook Messenger, and that's where I got to meet her for the first time. And that night was incredibly powerful because my dad, who is incredibly supportive, and my mom, we got to talk to my birth mother face to face for the very first time in almost 30 years at that point. So we shared a lot of heartfelt conversations and got to talk a lot about our experiences. And she was apologizing for everything. And we kept saying, don't apologize. This means a lot that we get to meet you. And what happened is my tita was actually planning a family reunion in the Philippines. So these pictures you're seeing here was a family reunion they were planning on doing long before I came into the picture. So we decided we're going to go back to the Philippines. My dad and I booked a plane ticket. We went all the way across the world. And then we got to meet my relatives. So as you see in here, they had the reunion. So these family members came from all over the world, because there were some from Australia, some from the Middle East, and they just congregated in this one ancestral home. And I got to meet them all. The following days, I got to meet my biological mother, and we went in a jeepney that my cousin was driving at the time, and a jeepney is a very popular transportation mechanism. And we went up this mountain, and we got to go into the little house, the little village area, and I got to meet her after 30 some years, and it was immensely powerful. And to this day, we still talk back and forth very frequently, very frequently through social media and so on and so forth. And it was absolutely incredible and massively life-changing for all of us, because there was rumor that I existed, but no one confirmed. And my birth mother kept it a secret for almost 30 years, which is completely understandable because culturally, I was born out of wedlock, so it was frowned upon. The sad thing is about 2 months later, after being reunited, my birth mother passed away. She passed away from cervical cancer, I believe. I went in there knowing about that, but literally at the very last end of her life is when we reunited. So that became immensely powerful. And the timing of that couldn't have been any more spot on. So that is essentially my story in a nutshell. The rest of the details that happens, like I mentioned, I documented it in detail about everything else. I'm writing this book, planning on getting that come out next year, but that is my story. So with the last bit of this, I'm going to just touch on the Operation Baby Lift and then the undocumented adoptees, which is something that hold very close to me because I didn't know about this until more recently. So for those who don't know, the Vietnam War, at the end of the Vietnam War in 1975, President Ford authorized the Operation Baby Lift. 2,000 Vietnamese children out of Vietnam were placed into American and European homes. Many had unknown American GI birth fathers, and white parents raised the majority, still controversial, according to Natalie Sherritt from the University of California. One of my friends who I actually did interview for this book, I wanted to uplift her story, so I'm going to mention her in this. One friend I interviewed, Nisha, who found out 12 years part of an Operation Baby Lift, stated in an interview, "When I was a young child, my adoptive father started my citizenship papers. When I was 4, I came to live with my grandparents, and my father continued to work on my papers. But of course, he fell sick with AIDS and then died. She fought for years with the INS until 2013, when she was granted her green card, and by 2018, she will be able to apply for citizenship." Now, I interviewed her recently. Because of everything that's going on in our current state of the country, she is very concerned about applying for citizenship. So what happened is she found out late in life she was undocumented. And many of you may wonder, is that even possible? Well, back in the 1970s, all you really needed was a social security number. And what happened is pre-2000, the system for adoptions was 2 directions. You had to do one entire paperwork, not to mention all the money and the lawyers and times and energy to fill out to make the child legally part of the family. The other half was for the citizenship. And it was extremely common that parents oftentimes forgot to finish the forms, or like in my friend's case, she went from family members to family members. There was a whole lot of stuff that happened in her family. And she found out late in life she was undocumented. Many adoptees find out late in life. And currently, according to an article written by NPR, I believe in 2014, there's approximately 35,000 undocumented adoptees in the United States. And how did that change? Well, in the year 2000, 2001, Congress enacted what was called the Childhood Citizenship Act, which mandated that all international adoptees must go through both protocols: the legalization of the child into the family, and then the legalization of the child into citizenship, the naturalization process. But before that, it was kind of expected, but it was kind of up in the air. Now, the problem is that Congress Act only applied to children who were 18 and under. So those who were already of 19 and above at that point in time were already considered an adult, which is why to this day, many adoptees are still undocumented. So when we talk about undocumented immigrants, adoptees, once again, nobody knows about them. So this leads to a very tragic death that happened in, I believe it was 2012. So this man right here is a man named Philip Clay. And according to the New York Times, that they published an article in 2017, he was adopted at age 8 to American citizen parents. 29 years later, in 2012, after several arrests, he was deported back to South Korea. He had many mental health problems and was not able to get help, which resulted in ending his life on May 21st, jumping from a 14th floor of an apartment building in north of Seoul. He was 42 years old. This death is one of the big pivots of what made a lot of adoptees speak out and talk about their experiences of adoptions, and also speak out regarding the deportations and those who are undocumented. This resonates with me because for many adoptees, I went to a heritage camp and many adoptees were concerned if they actually were legal. And one of the things we presented on the panel was telling the parents, make sure you show your children the paperwork to prove it to them, because it is a concern. I'm a very firm believer that nobody should be deported, period. But this also adds a little bit more of that conversation that people may not even know. So a person they could be talking to that's all unaware may not even know that the person is undocumented. And again, because it's adoptions, it wasn't, they were adopted as children, they didn't have a choice for that. So one of the other things I like to present is also different Facebook groups as well. So what can adoptees do knowing this information? Well, one of the biggest things I stress is getting involved. For me, my biggest passion is graphic design, advertising, marketing. I love that. So I started finding a love for both sociology, activism, and advertising. So I started getting involved with different communities, as AJ presented. And as you can see right here, there is multiple different groups that do exist. One of these here that's called Adoptees from Asia. My found out cousin actually runs this. And there's also Filipino adoptees on Facebook groups. There's a Michigan Searching for Adoption support group for all adoption, or all adoptees, including white adoptees as well, both domestic and international. So there are different avenues to reach out and find that community, find people who share these struggles. Now, when we mentioned about belongingness, a lot of adoptees, at least for me, and again, my experience as a transnational and a transracial adoptee, I couldn't really relate to a lot of people I grew up around because, I didn't have the words to describe my experience as a person of color. So there are certain experiences that adoptees feel or have experienced that non-adoptees may not. For example, one of the things that one of the other adoptees I interviewed for my book brings up is she and I both feel the same way. We grew up where we weren't white enough to be white, but we also were not part of our own culture. One of the things I stress is I grew up culturally white. I was not raised Filipino culturally, meaning my blood and my skin and how I look was the only thing that made me Filipino. There was a few things here and there that we share that were Filipino in our household, but I didn't know about everything about Filipino-ness. So foods like even lumpia, longanisa, and pancit bihon, all that food we never ate. I never knew about that. Anything I learned about the Philippines growing up was out of my own personal research. So I was not Filipino enough to be Filipino. And oftentimes when I'm in Filipino communities and other Asian communities, sometimes it does slip. But if I don't know what this is, sometimes I get the, what kind of Filipino are you? One that wasn't raised around Filipino-ness. And then again, when I'm in a white circle, people would ask, like, why is your hair this way? I had a kid play in touch with my hair growing up. They would ask, why is my skin dark? A lot of really weird questions like that. Do I speak English? I had people ask me, I don't look American. And I've had somebody ask, or actually say to me once, you speak really, really good English. Where did you learn that? And I just responded, in the United States. I lived there my whole life. So a lot of things that are kind of difficult to explain. The other thing that I want to also highlight is the internalized colorism and racism that happens with adoptees of color specifically. So I interviewed my cousin, who was also adopted and was reunited with his family. I interviewed him and he explained about how he got ridiculed for his skin color because he is actually darker. He was darker than me. And he went through the skin bleaching process, which is different than skin tanning. Skin tanning is temporary and it darkens the surface, but bleaching goes deep and actually bleaches the melanin that makes the skin dark. And I quoted him saying, people assumed due to my brown skin that I was a terrorist because of the association with my brown and darker skin. And what he did is he started using products that actually burn. He described how his skin was burning and it would actually lighten up his skin. And now to this day, he's lighter than me, but he will never get the skin color back. And that's an unfortunate internalized racism and colorism that is shared across multitudes of people of color. And then in the adoptee community, we're kind of straddled in this orphaned position. Again, my personal perspective. So, as I mentioned, one of the statistics that I've come across is adoptees tend to be about 3 to 4 times more likely to try to attempt or commit suicide than non-adoptees. So suicide rates and mental health is incredibly important for adoptees because, again, they're in a very unique position where, especially if they're transracial and transnational or either or one or the other, they don't fit the narratives with any group, especially when we talk about race. And when it comes to that internalized struggle, it's very difficult to explain to those from the outside. They could still empathize, but they may not fully understand. And when we talk about things such as microaggressions or aggressions in general, there are certain things that adoptees are told that other non-adoptees may not. And again, that intersectionality happens, such as, do you know your dad? Why were you getting for adoption? One of the most horrifying questions a lot of adoptees end up getting is typically, what runs in your family? When we go to the medical clinics, what runs in your family? I don't know. That actually caused me to have a lot of internal depression because I didn't know if I was a walking time bomb because I had no record. I didn't know what I carried. There was no records of that. Other things such as even terms like, do you know your real parents? Who are your real family? Have you tried looking for your real family? I've gotten to a point where I respond with, my real family is at home. If you're talking about my bio family or my biological family, that's a different story. But real, oftentimes to imply the idea that who your parents are not really your parents. It's actually these people who gave birth to you is your actual parents, which, as we know, that doesn't define a parent. So terms like that, I grew up around hearing very frequently, very, very frequently. And it definitely causes a lot of that like frustration. So what I ended up doing later in life is I started taking that frustration and then going out into the world and involving that as much as I can in everything that I touch. So my music is culturally influenced with the respect to the cultures that they came from. All of the advertising and design work that I do involves people of color heavily because I always think there's that one child out there somewhere that will see this. And if they don't see themselves, it kind of becomes, I don't think I could ever become that. No, you can. I'm also working on a potential TV show right now with a group of people where it is going to be an all Asian focused cast with a multi-diverse perspective taking place in the Metro Detroit region, publishing this book. There's many different ways to express the story and to uplift other people and their stories as well. So that pretty much covers my presentation. That is my story in a nutshell. And as I mentioned before, if you go to my YouTube channel, you can click on that bell and subscribe, get the notifications. You can watch my entire story. I recorded it all live. I got the video where I actually met the moment I met my biological mother. My dad was there and actually recorded it with me. And yeah, I'm eternally grateful for where I've come from. I mean, honestly, it really shaped me to have more appreciation with diversity and culture than any other way that I can possibly describe. So that is my story. And I am always a walking open book. So I am very open for all kinds of questions and all kinds of perspectives. And again, I always try my best to support other adoptees and amplify their voices as well.
Well, Dan, I have to tell you, Ruthie here. I knew your topic, but I wasn't prepared for the. Like you said that, people who don't quite, have your experience can empathize with you, but they don't understand the experience. And while I don't share your experience, we actually have, I think, a lot of overlap in the terms of some of the results, like the microaggressions, asking what you are.
Mm-hmm.
And when you said that you were not white enough to be white, but not Filipino enough to be Filipino, that was very similar to something I said yesterday during my own talk. I am not white enough to be white, but I am also not Black enough for a lot of Black people.
Mm-hmm.
But also one of my children is adopted. He is not from another country,
Mm-hmm.
but and while he is biracial like myself, he's actually my nephew, but he is not biracial in the same way that my children are, because my husband is white. So I'm biracial and then my husband is white. So I have 3 biological children who are a lot lighter. And then my oldest, he is a bit darker, and actually he could probably pass for a light-skinned Black boy.
Wow.
But just hearing what you're saying, because he does look different from us,
Mm-hmm.
hearing what you're saying about that and your experience, it made me really sad to think that as he gets older, people are going, kids or whatever, people are going to ask him those questions, not necessarily meaning to do harm or to hurt, but still. And so that tear up a little bit just thinking about it, just because I remember how I felt, even people asking me, what are you? And then for him, knowing your real parents, like you said, just, whew, okay. So
Well, I'm very happy that it touched you, but it is a sad reality. When I went to the Heritage Camp, overwhelmingly, most of the parents were white, which is not by accident. White parents predominantly do adoptions. And one of the things they brought up was that exact concern, is that they never thought about race when it came to their children. They go, I raised my child well. I took him to a good school. I did everything I could. But when we told them that the world would treat your child one way when they're with you, they'll treat the child a completely different way when they're not with you. Like, for example, like you mentioned, if your child is Black and your parents are white, that Black child will grow up and go out into the world still as a Black person. A Black adoptee is still a Black person.
Yes.
And the world will see that. And if the parents are not aware of all of this, it's very difficult for them to relate to the child. And that can cause a lot of conflicts. And it is a very unfortunate reality check for many white parents to realize that we wish we lived in a world with that when we're at the case, but that's not. I had countless different experiences looking back that I never thought of was even close to a racist situation. But then I look back at it later in life, I go, whoa, that was very bad.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get what you're saying. It's even over the course of my relationship with my husband, he's learned, that the way that he experiences things is completely different than the way that I experience them as somebody who's at least not white. And, like the first time we visited Michigan, because that's where he's from, the first time we visited Michigan, we got a lot of stares in the grocery store, and he didn't even notice, but I was like, did you see? That's like the 5th person who's like turned around to look at us. We were holding hands in the store.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just, and he was like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, you don't see that? And he just didn't see it. He just didn't see it. And I saw it. And so it's just something that, he's learning over the years. But he's learned it. And I think that that's really important. So I guess that's the big thing I wanted to go with, is that it can be learned. You have to
it can be.
become conscious of it. But as if you are white parents who have adopted a child of color, or a child from another country, even, right? Because you could still adopt them from another country and then they still be white. That is going to be a struggle that they have. There was one question I wanted to ask you. So in terms of the undocumented adoptees, you mentioned the law that worked for everybody who was 18 and under. do you think the solution, and to be honest, I mean, that's kind of what I think, the solution is to just write up a law that creates a process to not threaten anybody with deportation, but at least creates a process for people who are over the age of 19 who have now discovered that they are undocumented but lived here and have lives here, to just give them a process, and then, you know, there's a way?
I mean, the reality is that I wish there was a way for all people who immigrated here, because it's the same story with those who came over here who would seek asylum and for refugees as well. So it kind of gets into that intersectionality with that. And for those who grew up here, I wish there was. But as we mentioned, like, a lot of people don't know about these undocumented immigrants. And like I said, one of my friends is in that boat right now. She even told me in the interview she is really scared to go apply for citizenship because of what's going on and because of her past. And it puts them in a position to where they can't move. But I do wholeheartedly agree that in a perfect world, we would draft up something. There are petitions that exist out there, and I believe there are groups I came across in passing that are fighting for that, for the rights for some sort of a naturalization system to allow all these undocumented adoptees to become citizens. But as we've seen, something very simple can easily open up a whole bunch of doors that they get fought back for, and it's unfortunate.
We saw that with the Dreamers Act.
The Dreamers Act. I mean, the South Korean Philip Clay was not the only one who got deported. I remember researching and read a Iranian girl got deported. 2 Chinese people have gotten deported. I think a Vietnamese has gotten deported. I think someone from Eastern Europe has gotten deported. I mean, the minute they run into the law or anything, it's like, boom, they're gone. And it's horrifying.
The ramifications of whatever, getting pulled over, even, you know, the ramifications of anything like that immediately, it's like an atom bomb. It should have been small, probably, or even, you know, even if it was serious, not that serious to be, oh, now you're just out of the whole country. So that's, well, I feel like I could probably talk with you about this for quite some time. So I'm gonna connect with you offline, but I don't want to hold up the other sessions. So I just wanted to thank you so much for being here and telling your story. I was riveted. As soon as I came on, I was riveted. So I really appreciate that. And for anyone who's watching, if you have any questions, additional questions for Daniel, be sure, please, to reach out. It's funny, my husband's name is Daniel. But be sure to reach out to him. And check out his website. And if you have any questions, please do reach out to him. And thank you again to all of our sponsors. And we actually have some other sessions, of course, today going up through 9. And this is the final day of the summit. So please get in there, and with the likes and your reviews and your shares, they help us put on the summit again in the future. So thank you so much again, Daniel, for being here.
Maraming salamat po. Thank you so much.